All right, so we're going to talk real quick about connected dot plots. And this is coming from this link to connected dot plots, and you can kind of see what those look like. So it's again, we've watched the video, we've learned about what connected dot plots work and how they work and when you might use them. So let's look at just grabbing this code and bringing it in. We'll talk through what's happening in each line. Make a new code cell and run that cell. Again, it can stand alone by itself because that's how the graph gallery works. So as I look through this code, initially I see importing my libraries, standard stuff. Then we create a data frame here, and you see that it's going to use NumPy to create a value, and then take that existing value and then add on top of it. And what we're going to see is, and this is going to turn these values into columns in a dictionary that will turn into a data frame. I'll talk about this a little bit, and you can see that the blue is random, and then the green is a random value on top of that. Right? So sometimes those numbers are shifting around. We're not really ever going to need to do this, but what this is doing is it's taking the values, creating a list of numbers to characters using the map function that takes the character function and takes each of these numbers from 65, converts it to a character, in which case you're talking about uppercase letters. So basically what's happening is I've got a list of uppercase letters, I've got a value that's random, and I've got a value on top of that is random. I sort it by the first value, and then I'm starting to make my chart. The chart has horizontal lines from the low value to the high value. In this case, the high value is always larger than the lower value. In our data we're about to work with, that's not always going to be the case, and we'll see what that code looks like otherwise. Then we have two scatter plots. Scatter plots, again, are just positioned dots. Where do they go on this alpha range? Again, a range is from 1 to index, in this case, length of our index we know is 20 letters plus 1, so it doesn't start at 0, it instead starts at 1, and it creates positions up our line. So sky blue is soft, so we're seeing that at a full opacity, or alpha. Green is a really dark color, so if I see it at 40%. If we were to do it at 1%, you're going to see a very harsh green point, and that's going to show, have your eyes already thinking that means there's more significance or value to that position, and that's really not the case. These are just two different points, literally random points in this case, but usually it's a time period, year to year shift, and you don't want the color of your choice or the density of the dot to indicate anything. You want to let the data tell the story and not the color choices of the designer. Then we see our legend, we see the X-ticks are the values up the row, and what are we going to use? We're going to use that column group. Again, in this case, the group was just the alpha letters, and you kind of see it up the row here, up that column of X-ticks, Y-ticks rather. Here's our title, it's left aligned. Then we have our different labels, and we show that. Great, so that makes this chart. And what we want to do is do the same thing, but with the data of this data set. So here we have NFL data. You can see the conference that the team's in. Notice that the team is defined as TM. Then we have the wins of a year and then the losses of a year. And you see that kind of repeats. Great. So what we want to do is we want to do the exact same thing that we had, but with the data that's in this table. So the data frame that we just got is going to go here. So what I want to do is compare my, let's say, wins between 2 years. So wins of 2021 compared to the wins in 2022. So those are the columns of data that are in my data frame, right? We know that they're in the data frame, so I can access any of those things as I refer to them here. Then the next thing it asks is something related to, if I just run this code, let's see what happens. Okay, so it says I'm trying to do some of this, but I can't sort along my Y because I don't have a column team. So now we have the value we know from our data set was TM, team, and now I've got a functional chart. Looks like that. Next thing we want to do is we're going to convert the above into a function. And how do we start a function? Def. What's our function going to do? Make a chart. How do I call the function? Make chart. And for now, I'm just going to take stuff that I know works, literally copy it, paste it all into my function, indent it all. So right now, if I run it, it runs everything that ran above and makes the exact same chart. That's a success. But it's not really it's not a very helpful function when you can't modify it. And right, the function here will only ever show this data and will only ever show this column in the way that it's currently formatted. So what we want to do is we want to give it some parameters. And you can see already up here in this comment some ideas for the possible parameters, right? So our data frame, what data frame do we want to work with? What column are we wanting to show? What labels are we wanting to do? And then how do we want to, what are our Y ticks going to be, right? So is it going to be an alpha letters? Is it going to be the team? And then in a minute, we're going to see some players. So is it going to be, what is the Y order or the Y label or Y, whatever that is, right? So this again is the template. The template is placeholders. So right now I've got a specific data frame that's too specific. So I need to create, I'm going to take these objects up here, overwrite where there are currently items. So in this case, this was the call that I was looking at. Let's refer to that as call 1. This is the other column that I was looking at. I need to refer to it as my placeholder, call 2. I've got a label. I've got another label. Other students in the class have talked about like maybe even having a lot more information that are in our parameters, right? If you know that your figure size might be changing, you don't want to change it in the function. You want to change it through the function call, the actual function call. You might do fig size, fig width, fig height or something, right? You could do a whole bunch of things there. Then we have down here, needs to be in the function. How are we going to be sorting this? We're going to be sorting it using that value of our Y order. A couple additional things. Let's first get here and then we can come back and look at what the title is going to do. Because right now the title is a string. We can see that it's a string because it's in red, and it's always going to be that in the current function structure. So we might tweak that, but I've got this place, data frame check, column check, call 2 check, label 1, all these through. Okay, so now I need to call the function with specific things. Data frame is equal to the data frame I just have on line 39. And then what columns am I looking at? And then what column am I looking at? And then what is my label going to be? And then what is my other label going to be? And then what is the order that I want to sort it by? I'm going to look at what was so that I kind of can build in the exact same way. So W2021, W2022. So come back down and fill those gaps in. W2021, W2022. Labels, again, labels are going to show over here. Eventually we'll want them to have some meaning, but right now I'm just going to say, actually let's start with having them wins in 2021, wins in 2022. And then how are we going to sort it? And we know from the work above that we sorted it previously by TM. So I'm doing that. If I run it, I should see the exact same chart as I had above. Exact same. Including the label, right? So now what I could do is I could say, you know what, I want this label to also include those variables of my label names. So label 1 plus my text plus label 2. And what that's going to do, it's going to use those variable or arguments or parameters from my function into my function, my actual function definition, which as a result will work every single time. If I change the text down here, again, this is a label, right? That's now my label. Now when I run it, I should see that it's changing the value in both my actual labels and in the title where I've used that reference. Great. So that's working. That's looking pretty good. So what I need to do is grab this, because I'm going to do stuff with it all the way down. What's different? I'm going to now look, instead of teams, I'm going to look at running backs. Here's the URL for that CSV. And before I plot the chart, I want to see what that data looks like. So df.head. Okay, so in this data frame, whoops, you got an extra H there. I see player. That's my new team. So where I have TM, we'll probably need to be talking about player. And in this case, it says, I want to see attempts. So one of these, this looks like games started, attempts and yards and touchdowns, etc. So maybe ATT from 1 year and then attempts from the next. And I can say this is the attempts they made in 2021, attempts in 2022. And then I can uncomment that, decomment that, and see if that worked how I expected it to. All right. Totally worked how I expected it to. I see the labels, I see the plots, I see this shape, that's looking good. My Y is a mess, and that's to be expected because I'm plotting every single every single running back in my data frame. But what I want to do is actually plot where they have more than 100 attempts. Before we do that, let's do the rest of what we've got using the same idea. So I'm going to do a filter here at some point. Filter goes here. But until then, I want to take this structure and do the same thing for charts below. Okay, so swap out your CSVs and see what data needs to go. Again, look at the head, confirm that you're looking at the right values, and start there. Okay, so this looks like quarterbacks, looks great. This looks like receivers, looks great. Okay, I've got touchdowns and yards and receptions, targets. This looks like information related to being a wide receiver. Okay, so now let's look at filters. Filters, we know, are equal to a data frame where a condition exists. In our case, what is that condition? I want to look for where in the data frame, in the column attempts of 2021, I have a value greater than 100. That's what this says. Attempts in both seasons where attempts are greater than 100. If I run that, my data frame gets smaller, right? What I also want to do is make sure that there's two conditions, right? So I can do and another condition, a different column. To do this, I'm going to put parentheses, copy, paste, 2022. Now my data frame gets smaller. To save you some time, I mean, it's all running in the same cell. It doesn't really matter, but you could do like data frame 2 and then plot data frame 2 so that you know that you're not losing your original data frame. It doesn't really matter since my DF gets reset up here anyhow. So I've done that. I filter it down, and I see a lot more white space in my chart. If your Y looks all piled together, you probably need to make some adjustments. All right, so let's do the same thing. I've got my cool filter. That's looking good. Filter goes here. I'm going to plop that filter in. And now I'm going to look at this table. So in this case, I'm not looking at attempts, but instead I'm looking at completion percentage. So right here it says comp perk. And then in this column, comp perk. And then I want to filter that not where the percentage is greater than 100 because it can't be greater than 100, but instead where it's greater than 0. Plot my chart, comp perk. And we'll leave that for a second to fix the rest. Okay. So I've got a bunch of people that have pretty low numbers. They're greater than 100, or sorry, they're greater than 0, but not much. Let's make greater than 40%. All right. Still pretty dense. That's kind of not telling a whole lot, but you know, that's great. We could also look at our table and look at other data that might be in there and say, not only do I want to do percentages, because that doesn't say much. You could have not that many, you could have a pretty high percentage with only 2 or 3 attempts. Maybe I also want to do with touchdowns of either year greater than 5. So I need to come in to my filter and expand my filter. And now I'm looking at the same thing, same idea. I'm expanding this filter, but instead of a percentage, I'm going to do touchdowns of these different years greater than 5. So they've scored at least 5 touchdowns, meaning that they have thrown a fair number of passes, and that might show a little bit more variety. Great. I see the spacing is different, and that kind of took out people who might have only played a game or 2. This looks like basically the NFL starters for 2021. Okay. So now my attempts are still showing attempts. I can say completion percentage. And now when I run that, I should see really long label title, but that's okay. Completion percentage of 2021, 22, got all of that. That's looking great. And then the last one, same idea. I got to do a filter. And I'm going to do, in this case, yards. It's 20 yards, 2021. So I got to match the exact structure of my yards greater than 750. (22) 750. I run that. See what our DF head looks like here. Both of those are above 750. Excellent. Make my chart. This is the columns that I'm wanting to plot. That's looking pretty good. It still says attempts, so maybe yards, or reception yards. So what I've done is took the recipe, the instructions on how to do something up here, make my function. What does the function do? It makes a chart taking these parameters, uses them within my function, and then I call this. And then every time I call this going forward, it should really only be 3 or 4 lines because I've brought in the data frame, filtered the data frame, made my chart. The show is actually optional, so you could even get away with probably 3 lines of code here because all of the instructions, just like when you say make a pizza is on page 75 in my cookbook. I don't need to tell you the whole instructions. I just say make a pizza's on 75. And that's it. So if you've done this, you should be have some charts. Again, if I change anything here, right? If I change it change the color, maybe this is going to be red. Now when I come down here, going forward, it's red. And red. Every time I run this, it calls that function, make chart. Calls that function, make chart. Calls that function, make chart. And now I see things correct. Adjusted, rather. So let's say green and yellow and orange. So the orange points, maybe my orange needs to be at a higher thing because it's kind of soft. So now maybe I'm at 75%. Again, you can tweak these things, and as a result, you see different things in your chart. That looks great. And that's our video. Thank you.